Eh bien, bonjour tout le monde, c'est John d'Apologia. Je suis ici avec Greg Koukl pour parler de son livre Tactiques, qui est un livre de référence pour tout le monde de l'apologétique anglo-saxon et qui depuis peu est disponible en français grâce à l'équipe du collectif Apologia et aux éditions NFF. Donc Greg a fondé Stand to Reason en 93 et est actuellement président de cette organisation. Il est intervenu sur plus de 90 campus universitaires aux États-Unis et à l'étranger, dont un en France. Et il anime sa propre émission de radio depuis plus de 30 ans. Il a obtenu une maîtrise en philosophie de la religion et de l'éthique et une maîtrise en apologétique chrétienne et est professeur adjoint d'apologétique chrétienne à l'université de Biola. Mais là, aujourd'hui, on va parler de son livre qui est un best-seller, le livre Tactiques. Donc, il a été publié en 2009, donc ça fait déjà quelques années qu'il est sorti. Et c'est souvent mis en avant comme l'une des bases par les grands apologètes américains et anglais. Et c'est pour ça qu'avec l'équipe Apologia, on s'est dit il faut absolument qu'on traduise ce livre. Donc, Greg, merci d'être avec nous pour cette interview. Est-ce que tu peux nous faire peut-être un petit elevator pitch sur ce livre pour lancer un peu la discussion?
Well, John, bonjour, and bon appétit, and bonne nuit. I mean, that's pretty much the extent of my French. But thank you for this time to talk together. I think the simplest way to explain what I'm trying to do in the book Tactics is to offer a game plan, in this case, a 3-point game plan that will give Christians a clever, even shrewd way of maneuvering effectively in conversations, and in a friendly way, but still have a big impact. The most difficult thing, I think, for Christians is that they don't know how to engage people who are challenging them in an effective fashion. And this particular approach, this game plan, trades on using questions to keep the Christians safe in conversations, but still move the conversation effectively forward in a friendly fashion. And all of those things are really critical to making a difference with people.
Merci. Ouais, ça me fait penser quand je suis tombé dans l'apologétique, si on peut le dire comme ça. Je me rappelle encore, c'était suite à une discussion que j'avais eu avec quelqu'un qui était athée et qui a dit quelque chose et je ne savais pas comment répondre. Et à ce moment-là, on se sent vraiment très mal. On se dit, tiens, pourquoi j'ai pas toute cette connaissance pour répondre? Mais je comprends que les questions sont importantes et c'est là où quand j'ai lu Tactiques, j'ai vu c'était le livre dont j'avais besoin. Mais voilà, pourquoi as-tu écrit ce livre, Greg?
Well, I wrote the book for people like you, actually, and in circumstances like you're facing. I have been on interactive talk radio for over 30 years and spoken on more than 90 university campuses here and abroad, and that gives me an opportunity to engage people on these critical issues. And lots of times when Christians engage others, even if they know some apologetics, they know how to handle some of the issues they're facing, they don't do a very good job at it. And the reason is because these are controversial issues and they're emotionally laden, influenced, and so it's easy to get into a fight. Yeah. It's not always a pretty picture, okay? And so being reflective myself on my own interactions with people, I began to develop some ways to interact more effectively. I realized, for example, that using questions was a much more effective way to engage. All right, because it encouraged dialogue. It was polite. I'm asking someone else something about their point of view, but it's also incredibly effective if used properly for lack of a better way of putting it, corner someone with the flaws or difficulties or problems with their own challenge or their own view. Now, I'm not looking to make people feel bad or look ridiculous or something, but you and I both know that many times people have ridiculous ideas that they hold for ridiculous reasons. That's actually what people think about Christians, especially in France. And so it's through the questions that I can set up the circumstances in which I can help them to see that and kind of lead them to that point. I'll give you a very simple example of this. I have people I've talked to who are Mormons, and they are, and they think Mormonism is Christian, and they're Christians, and I'm a Christian. Why would you say that you're a Christian? Because it turns out that Mormonism is a very different religion. All the same vocabulary as classical Christianity, all different definitions and meanings, okay? Very different religion. But because they believe in Jesus, they say, they're Christian. And so I ask, now that's a problem, isn't it? Now I know that's a problem. Just believing in Jesus doesn't make you a Christian. New Agers believe in Jesus. Jehovah's Witnesses believe in Jesus. And so I could just tell them, well, believing in Jesus, some kind of Jesus, doesn't make you a Christian. You believe in the wrong Jesus. And the minute I say that, now I'm in an argument. Okay, I'm telling them they're wrong. But if instead, when they say, well, I'm a Christian because I believe in Jesus, I ask this question: are Muslims Christian? They're going to say, no, of course not. But Muslims believe in Jesus, which is true. There's more in the Quran about Jesus than about Muhammad. So there is a Jesus they believe in, but it's not the real Jesus. And so what I do is in that case, I'm getting the Mormon to admit that simply believing in Jesus is not adequate to be a Christian. It depends on which Jesus, in a sense, that you believe in. So now that takes away a barrier for me and allows me to move into a more productive conversation with them about who they think Jesus is compared to classical Christianity. So notice there, I've got over what you might call a speed bumps. I don't know if they have speed bumps in the roads in France, but I mean, in some countries, the speed bumps are bodies laying around. I don't know. But in any event, I just removed an obstacle, all right, to get around, to get me onto the issue of who is the real Jesus. But I've done it in a polite kind of fashion. Now, I have boxed them in a little bit, as you can tell, but I've done it in a legitimate fashion, in a proper way, without trying to make them look stupid, all right? Because I'm very friendly when I'm doing this. I'm just asking, wait a minute, are Muslims Christian? No, well, they believe in Jesus. So just believing in Jesus doesn't make you a Christian, right? Depends on which Jesus you believe in. So now that's just one step in a conversation. So I've just used a simple example to show how that works. But when I realized, as I'm beginning to do these kinds of things in conversations on the radio or during a Q&A after the lecture I might give at a university or something, I realized that I'm discovering some ways to get through the tough spots easier. I'm also discovering that many times when people raise an objection, there are ambiguities in the objection. And I'm going to need to clear those ambiguities up because I want to get a clear idea of what the challenge is. For example, someone might say, well, the Bible has been changed. You can't trust the Bible, it's been changed. Now, I know what they're getting at, okay? It has to do with a more formal discipline of textual criticism, how the copying and recopying of manuscripts over time might corrupt those manuscripts, okay? Well, I know that process, but I'm telling you, most of the people who raise the objection really don't know anything about the process. They have heard the objection before. It's been enough to stonewall, stop the Christians in their tracks, and it's been effective to shut the Christian up. Okay, that's all they know, most of them. Maybe they've read a book about it or some things or some articles, but I want them to explain more about what they mean. And that's why my first question in the game plan is, what do you mean by that? Or some variation. So you think the Bible's been changed. How has it been changed? Can you explain that to me? So now, boom, they challenge me. And right away, I'm just offering a clarification. I'm showing I'm interested in their view. I'm interested enough to get more detail, but I want them to give me more detail. So now we have a dialogue, right? And it's not fighting. We're not banging heads. But I realize when I ask a question for more information, which, by the way, any Christian can do. You don't need to know philosophy. You don't need to know apologetics. You don't need to know theology. You don't need to know anything. You just need to know to ask the question. You may not have an answer. That's okay. If you're new to this, all you want to do is get to the next step of the conversation. That's it. Or maybe that's all you can go to. That's all right. Because if you just ask for clarification, you're getting an education about their view. Okay? So, and that's good. That's beneficial maybe for the next time around or whatever. So there's no heavy burden on the Christian to go the distance, or to use an American metaphor here, to, swing for the fence, as we say. That means it's a baseball term where you're trying to hit a home run. You don't have to hit a home run.
I'll have fun translating.
I guess you guys play you guys play a form of football. You don't have to kick a goal with every make a goal with every kick, I guess. That's okay. You can just move the ball down the field a little bit. That's okay. You don't have to worry about the goals right now. So because I'm aware of some things that I was doing that were more effective, and not only using the questions, but also being able to see some flaw in their view, and that's the different tactics. This allowed me to maneuver more effectively. Okay, and so I decided, well, I should teach some other people these things I'm learning. So I began to teach those things, and then why not just write a book about it? And so that's really was the genesis of the Tactics book, is taking these concepts that I learned over time, little by little, that I was discovering were very, very effective in helping me navigate conversations, and then putting them in written form. And I'll tell you something, John, the most common response that I've gotten from people who read the book is that this book changed my life, because it gave them, and I see you're nodding in agreement, it changed my life too. I understand that. It's very flattering when I hear that, and humbling. Yet at the same time, I'm not surprised, because the game plan and the general approach, the tactical approach, completely changes the dynamic, the interaction that we have with non-Christians, to make it much more friendly, much more relaxed, much easier for especially the beginner, the new Christian, the one who doesn't have a lot of training, and much more effective. That's why I wrote the book.
So that's very, very true what you just said about it's to say it's a life-changing book can be sound a bit like an overstatement, but I definitely think it's a mind-changing book. Oui, donc Greg, l'une des tactiques principales du livre, c'est la tactique que tu appelles la tactique Colombo. Donc on a aussi ça en France. Et j'aimerais que tu nous en dises un peu plus sur voilà, pourquoi Colombo peut nous aider dans nos conversations.
Colombo was the name of an American TV detective that had a certain style. He would ask a lot of questions, but he would come in under the radar. Nobody took him seriously. He's not a threat. And I think this is a great way of describing the tactic that I teach, called Colombo, as the central part of the game plan, where Christians use very specific kinds of questions to safely navigate difficult conversations. And this is really key. Questions keep you safe. They help Lieutenant Colombo, and they will help the Christian. And what I do in the Columbo tactic is I give 3 steps of a game plan using questions that are incredibly simple to employ, but very, very effective, not only to make your points, but also to maneuver in a friendly fashion without fighting each other, without getting into arguments, without making the other person defensive. And this can be done by the very youngest Christian. You don't even need to know hardly anything to begin employing the tactic in an effective way. Questions keep you safe. And the Columbo tactic will allow you to navigate deeper water by staying in the shallow end of the pool and getting people to think. And that's the goal there. Put a stone in their shoe. Getting them to think about Jesus, because I'm convinced the smart money is on Jesus. And the Columbo tactic is the best way I know of to help people to see that.
Une question que j'ai pour toi, Greg, c'est par rapport à comment ça marche avec, selon les personnes avec qui on échange. Par exemple, si en France, on va beaucoup parler des athées, et les athées aiment avoir une façon raisonnée pour arriver à leur façon de penser à des choses. Après, on a aussi beaucoup de musulmans, on a aussi des hindous, et pas tout le monde a les mêmes approches et les mêmes réactions à la façon raisonnée. Donc, comment tu vois les tactiques dans ce contexte-là?
Mm-hmm. Oh, this is a good question. And in a sense, fortunately for French Christians, the biggest problem you're going to run into is atheism or materialism or something like that. These are all together in one set of ideas. And because atheists value reason, they follow from the Enlightenment, so to speak, and they think that they're the bright ones, the reasonable ones. We actually have a similar epistemology, a way of knowing things. You know, we both believe in reason. And I think that the smart money rationally is on Christianity. We have a common ground about the way we think. So for the most part, the use of tactics in the French environment is going to be a lot easier than people in other environments. Even in the States, you have atheists, but it isn't the main thing. What you have is you have people that are all over the spectrum and think all kinds. They don't know how to think carefully about anything. At least atheists pride themselves in their rational thinking, and so make an attempt. Now, they make all kinds of mistakes. Nevertheless, at least you have some common ground there. Now, I think actually Muslims are similar, though, because Muslims actually believe their belief is true. They think their God is the true God, and Islam is the true religion, and their prophet is the true prophet. And so they are also, in a certain sense, very similar in the way they think about things to the atheists, except for their content of their belief is different. And they also have a revelation that is really important to them. Okay? So atheists have no atheistic revelation is science. Science says, therefore it's true. So that's their religion. That's their inspired text, science, where Muslims have the Quran and some other writings that are their inspired texts, and those are critical. Okay, so in a certain sense, they're like Christians. Christians care about reasoning, but they also realize that we can't get all our information about God just by looking around and reasoning. God has to reveal certain things to us, and so the scripture is the place where that's done. So in a certain sense, we are actually much more like Muslims than we are like atheists, right? So the distinction here is that given the fact that Muslims emphasize their revelation so much, in order to deal with that, we have to understand some things about their revelation and their belief system, and to address that. But when we do that, we address it with the tactical game plan and in the tactical way. Okay. And in fact, there are Muslim apologists, not so many of them, but they do exist. That is, they're giving reasons why they think Islam is the true religion and Christianity, whatever. Believing in the Trinity is irrational in their mind. Well, that's because they misunderstand the Trinity. The Trinity is not irrational. It's not contradictory. It's weird, but it's not contradictory if it's properly understood. And to some degree, our questions with a Muslim are to help them understand some things that we believe, so they get it correct and not incorrect. Many Muslim objections to Christianity are a result of a false understanding of what Christianity teaches. Okay. Now, when it comes to Hindus, you're right, this is different because they have, in many ways, a very different way of thinking about things. All right. Or Buddhist as well. All right. So I don't deal with Hindus and Buddhists hardly at all. But the advantage that we have in speaking to anyone in any circumstance with any religious belief, and this I got from Francis Schaeffer, writer who died in the 80s, that it turns out that they're all human beings. And being human, they are made in the image of God, as a matter of fact. And they have to live in the world that God made. And so I call this concept then bumping into reality, because reality is what wounds you if you don't take it seriously, right? So everyone has to live in the world that God made, and they are made in the image of God. And so there are certain things they cannot escape. Okay. And consequently, for example, Hindus believe, if Vedantic Hinduism holds that all of reality as we perceive it is just an illusion. Okay, it's just an illusion. But nobody lives that way, even Hindus. They treat reality as if it's real, because it is. And so it's such a strange thing. Their belief contradicts our common experience of reality. And so you have to kind of deny reality in order to hold the belief. Anyway, there's something we can work with the proper questions. Okay. So across the board, the fact that humans are made in the image of God, and they have to live in the world that God made for them, lets us know that there is common ground that we have that we can work from. I talk about this in the Tactics book, and like 4 years ago, I had an updated edition, 10th anniversary edition, and I added a chapter called Inside Out. And that's where the tactic Inside Out, where we talk about this idea that God has placed things inside of us that even when we believe a different worldview, end up coming out and bear testimony to the truth of Christianity and the truth of the world as it really is. So we have to be sensitive to our audience, but that doesn't change the game plan at all, nor the confidence. It changes the nature of the questions, but it doesn't change the confidence that we have that we can speak to them as fellow human beings and not as alien creatures who have no concept, no ability to conceptualize what we're talking about. They do. They're human beings. And we have common human nature that we can appeal to, and a reasonable faculty that allows us to work through these issues.
Quand on lit ton livre, on voit que tu dédies une partie pour expliquer le danger d'être bon aux tactiques. Et donc, là, pour expliquer un petit peu, parce que justement, d'apprendre ces tactiques, ça donne beaucoup de force dans les conversations. Mais quels sont pour toi les plus grands risques d'être bon avec l'utilisation des tactiques?
Well, I think one of the big strengths of the tactical approach is that there are very few real risks. You eliminate a lot of the standard risks you have in conversations if you're careful to use the tactical approach properly. So one of the biggest risks in general is getting into a fight, and people are angry, people are defensive. Or maybe not even knowing how to have a conversation that's productive. When you have a tactical game plan that gives you a grid or a formula, so to speak, of how to do that. And there are 3 steps to the game plan that make it very simple, I think. But I think one of the risks is, and I've had people mention this to me, though it hasn't been my experience, And they said, well, people are going to feel like they are in an interrogation, And I've never had that response from people. Why are you asking me so many questions? I'm not here to answer your questions or something like that. But I think that depends a lot on the attitude or the manner in which I communicate. I am asking genuine questions. Now, sometimes I know the answer to the questions. I'm building a case by asking questions I know the answer to, like I did a moment ago, and I asked the LDS, well, are Muslims Christian? Well, I know they're not, and they know they're not, but I'm just trying to get this fact out in front. So I know the answer to the question, which is really important in one stage of tactics, because you're trying to take them, so you're making a point by using your questions. Other times I'm not clear what the other person means, and so when I'm asking questions, I am genuinely trying to get clarity or help them to have clarity. So when a person says, well, the Bible's been changed, I have a pretty good idea where they're going with that. But I don't think they know anything about it. So I'm asking them so that they can be clear on their own view, that they're not clear on it, basically, because they can't answer that. They don't know how to explain it. Or they'll say, some characterization that's not accurate to the process of textual criticism. So in the way I deliver my questions, I'm not doing an interrogation. That's not my attitude. It's a friendly conversation. And frankly, most people are happy to answer the questions that explain their view. They have their view. They're confronting the Christian sometimes aggressively. Christian's wrong. The atheist, for example, is right. Okay, well, let me ask you some questions. Okay, I'm ready. I'm here. I'm going to tell you why I'm right. So they're generally happy to respond to questions, but I'm always careful to be calm and relaxed and sympathetic. No, what's the right word here? The questions I'm asking are genuine, even though I'm using them for a purpose. I have an agenda, so to speak. Nevertheless, I'm asking proper questions for the conversation. And because my mood or my manner demonstrates that, this is not troublesome. I've never experienced this as being troublesome to people. So that's one liability people have raised that I haven't experienced. And I think if your listeners are using the tactical game plan with the right attitude and in the right way, they're not going to run into that problem. One of the other problems is what happens when someone uses tactics against you, they ask me. Well, in the tactical game plan, I mentioned there are 3 steps. And the first step is just gathering information about somebody's view. So I'm going to ask some form of the question, what do you mean by that? The Bible's been changed? How has it been changed? Now, I'm not asking the question in a wooden way. I don't always use the phrase, what do you mean by that, to everything they say. I find different ways of forming that question, which is important, okay? And maybe that's another liability. People feel like they always got to say, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? Oh, okay, just be natural in conversation, okay? But so if somebody asks me that question, well, what do you mean by your view? I have no problem answering that question because I know what I mean. Yeah. All right. So I don't care if they ask me that question. That's not a problem. The second question that we use is, how did you come to that conclusion? All right. Or some form of that. So once they explain how the Bible's been changed, I'm going to ask, really, well, how do you know that's actually what took place? All right. So that's how did you come to that conclusion? What are your reasons for the view? If you're talking to an atheist, so when you say you're an atheist, what does that mean? What kind of atheist are you? Getting detail. All right. Okay. So why do you think atheism is true? It's a simple question. And by the way, there's no pressure on me. I'm just getting that information back. What if somebody asks me, why do I think Christianity is true? So they use the question back on me. I don't have any problem with that. I have reasons for what I believe, and I'm going to answer those questions because I'm able to. All right. It's the third step of Columbo where you're using questions to make a point, and you're asking a couple of questions that lead to a conclusion, that can be more troubling for Christians. Because sometimes they'll have an atheist, well, do you think this? Do you think this? Do you think, well, what about this? And then bang, you're stuck. Do you think God is good? Do you think God is powerful? Oh, but wouldn't a good, powerful God want to get rid of evil and be able to get rid of evil? But there's evil in the world, right? So now what? Oh, well, now the Christian has been led down the road, okay? And now they're stuck. Okay, they don't know how to, they may not know how to answer. All right, now I have an answer, which is really a question. So when you say there are things that are evil in the world, where are you getting your standard to judge those things by? Of course, this is a point that you make as well, and others, but this is a fair question. And that goes to the coherence of the challenge itself. It doesn't answer why a powerful God would allow evil in the world. However, it does raise the question. This isn't even a coherent question coming from you. Okay, so there's a way to manage that. And I wrote a book called Street Smarts, and I'll just hold it up here for people to see it. It is not translated into French yet, but where I go into chapters, unfortunately, yet that you'll have a shot at that, hopefully, John. But where I go into a lot of detail. I have 2 chapters, actually 3 chapters on atheism. And one of those chapters in the problem of evil, and it's titled Evil, Atheism's Fatal Flaw. That's the title, because the problem of evil works against them. It doesn't work against us. And I'll explain why that's the case. But you get a hint at it with the question I come back with to them. So if you have a sense that people are, an atheist, for example, or some objector is stacking up questions to you where you answer them, and now you're going to get like hammered at the end of the series of questions. You can just say, it sounds like you're asking questions to make your point. Why don't you just make your point? Just tell me what you believe and what your issue is or whatever. And so you just step outside of that questioning process. You basically don't let them use the tactic. Just tell me what you believe, and I'll see if I can answer it. If I can't, I can't, but that's all right. And so that's a way to avoid that. Just you don't get into the back and forth thing where they're leading you down the path with their questions, which is an appropriate technique. That's what we teach. But if they use it against you, then that could be harder for you, especially if you're not experienced. Now, people have asked me, well, what if somebody does that to you when you're trying to use the tactical approach? Well, then I lose the tactical advantage. Then I'll just tell them what I think about this, and I'll make my point, and they can respond. So I get the content out there, but I lose a little bit of a tactical edge that makes the content more effective or more persuasive. But those are some of the liabilities, I think, of the tactical approach. They're not big liabilities, though. They're small ones. The advantages are huge.
Oui, donc Greg, l'une des tactiques principales du livre, c'est la tactique que tu appelles la tactique Colombo. Donc, on a aussi ça en France. Et j'aimerais que tu nous en dises un peu plus sur voilà, pourquoi Colombo peut nous aider dans nos conversations.
Colombo was the name of an American TV detective that had a certain style. He would ask a lot of questions, but he would come in under the radar. Nobody took him seriously. He's not a threat. And I think this is a great way of describing the tactic that I teach, called Colombo, as the central part of the game plan, where Christians use very specific kinds of questions to safely navigate difficult conversations. And this is really key. Questions keep you safe. They help Lieutenant Colombo, and they will help the Christian. And what I do in the Colombo tactic is I give 3 steps of a game plan using questions that are incredibly simple to employ, but very, very effective. Not only to make your points, but also to maneuver in a friendly fashion, without fighting each other, without getting into arguments, without making the other person defensive. And this can be done by the very youngest Christian. You don't even need to know hardly anything to begin employing the tactic in an effective way. Questions keep you safe. And the Columbo tactic will allow you to navigate deeper water by staying in the shallow end of the pool and getting people to think. And that's the goal there. Put a stone in their shoe. Getting them to think about Jesus, because I'm convinced the smart money is on Jesus. And the Columbo tactic is the best way I know of.
Ouais, donc c'est intéressant ce que tu dis parce que ça montre, c'est l'importance de se préparer pour dans nos échanges. En fait, ton livre, il nous explique comment on doit réfléchir différemment, comment on doit préparer des questions, mais justement, cette préparation, elle est clé pour qu'on puisse éviter de reposer les mêmes questions tout le temps. Qu'est-ce que tu veux dire par ça? Qu'est-ce que tu veux dire par ça? Qu'est-ce que tu veux dire par ça? Ça peut devenir très répétitif et pas très agréable dans une conversation. Mais j'ai une question quand même, c'est que dans ton livre, est-ce que tu as vraiment les conversations aussi parfaites que ça? Tu dois être une vraie machine.
Well, all of the conversations in the Tactics book and in the Street Smarts book, which is a kind of a sequel to Tactics, all of those conversations that I offer as anecdotes, I actually had. Okay, I didn't make those up. Now, there are some conversations that clearly I make up for the sake of using it as a teaching tool. So I would say this, and then the person might say this, and then I'd ask this question, and they might respond like this, and then I'd ask this question. That is actually more characteristic of the Street Smarts book, which is absolutely filled with sample dialogues. Now, even in that case, some of the sample dialogues I've actually had, you know, with people. Other times I'm anticipating a dialogue where an issue would come up, and this is the way that I would prosecute that issue and that conversation. So here are the questions. Here's the first question that I would offer, and this is probably what they're going to answer. So, but even in the Street Smarts books, a lot of those dialogues I've actually had. So these are the kinds of things that have been effective for me to make my point. Now, by the way, effective, just as a point of information, in my view, effective doesn't mean I persuaded the person of my point. Effective means making my point well, giving a solid answer, a legitimate answer, an appropriate answer. Whether or not that answer will be satisfying to someone who's objecting, well, that's an entirely different matter. People who are objecting, I don't know their mental frame of mind, whatever. A lot of them, they're not going to be satisfied with anything. So I'm not trying to encourage people to give, here's the silver bullet, here's the magic. If you say this kind of thing or do this kind of thing, then, they're going to see the truth. No, they often do. This is the best method, I think, to help get people to think most carefully about their challenges and their own worldview. I call it putting a stone in someone's shoe. Okay? I'm just trying to annoy them in a good way. Right? I'm getting them to think about things. But whether or not that changes their mind, that's up to God. It's not up to me. That's not my responsibility. I need to respond in a clear fashion. Now, in the examples in the book that are actually anecdotes, in other words, these conversations actually took place. There's a conversation about a witch in Wisconsin in the Tactics book, right in the beginning. Okay. And in the Street Smarts, I have a chapter where I have 3 different conversations, and these are all things that took place, all conversations I had. Now, sometimes when conversations go longer, I have to abbreviate the conversations. And so I think I even mentioned this in both the books, that I do abbreviate, so it makes it sound more tidy than it always is. Sometimes they're not so tidy, you know, because that's the way conversations go. But I have to make them tidy for the sake of the book. But I'm accurately representing the substance of the conversation. I'm not changing it to make myself look better. Those are the conversations I actually had. So in many cases, they're just precisely as they took place, but sometimes they look tidier because I had to tighten it up a little bit for the sake of the writing. But to me, it is the case, even though things are sometimes untidy in general conversations, because that's the way conversations are, it doesn't mean we still can't maneuver effectively. And if I don't know of any other way of maneuvering a conversation that is more effective and keeps it most tidy than the tactical approach.
Ouais, c'est intéressant. En fait, ça me fait penser au fait que le livre a été écrit en 2009. On est en 2024, donc ça nous a pris 15 ans pour avoir Tactiques enfin en français. Et je me pose la question sur est-ce que tu penses que ces stratégies de conversation ont tenu le temps? Est-ce que tu penses que ça a évolué dans le temps? Ou est-ce que c'est quelque chose d'assez costaud, en fait, c'est tellement fondamental que ça s'applique autant aujourd'hui qu'il y a 15 ans, et les conversations qu'on va avoir aujourd'hui vont être plus ou moins les mêmes que celles qu'on avait 15 ans. Donc voilà, est-ce que tu penses que ça a changé ou pas?
One of the most frequent comments I get from people after they've read the material or sat through a class, and I just got this comment actually yesterday from someone online, is that this is the kind of material that people in business are taught to pursue to be more effective in business, whether they're in sales or some other, in leadership or human development or whatever, is you use questions to establish where people are coming from and what they're thinking and what they mean, and try to get an understanding of their views, and then you move on from there. So there's a sense in which the tactical game plan is timeless because it reflects really solid principles of communication and human interaction, particularly over controversial issues. All right. So this is not bound by time in any way, shape, or form. Now, some people have said, well, now we have postmodern people that are very subjectivistic or relativistic, and they don't care about truth. Well, in America, in the States, this is true to some degree in terms of the way they talk. But the fact is, as I mentioned before, we're all human beings made in the image of God. And we have to live in the world that God made it. And so we are bound by reality. I mean, reality is on our side, is what I've often said, because if people disagree with what is true about reality, they're going to bump into it. They're going to be injured by it possibly. And so we have that on our side. These points that I make in the book on how to navigate can be used in all sorts of circumstances. People say, well, can I use this in arguments with my wife? Well, the answer is yes, because they're legitimate. You have to be careful, more careful, especially in that circumstance. But the material is still the best, good. In fact, if you talk to marriage counselors, they say you ought to talk more often, and you ought to get clarity on what people mean and why they say the thing they say, kind of thing. That's standard. So these are timeless truths. All right. And by the way, it's been about 2009, 15 years now since Tactics book has been out, and it's still kind of at the top of the charts somewhat in Christian sales. And that's because it continues to be relevant to conversations with non-Christians. Indeed, it's become, in a certain sense, more important because the conversations especially in the West have gotten more volatile. They've just gotten harsher. The opposition in general, and I would say it's more the political left, which is, I don't know how big that is in France, but it's huge in the United States, has just gotten a lot more vocal and very, very aggressive, as you know. And consequently, it's important to stand against their ideas because they're damaging. They're deadly, in my view. They're deadly to a liberal democracy in the best sense of that word, and they're deadly to human rights. They're deadly to morality. They're deadly to all these things. That's the left. It always has been like that ever since the Russian Revolution. So it's really critical that we now engage these issues as effectively as we're able to. So tactics can be used beyond issues that just are tied to spiritual truth or moral truth. Although the moral truth is important, because the moral truth is what we see embedded in public policy issues. You know, what does it mean for justice? Now you got all kinds of justice. You got sexual justice and gender justice and environmental justice and social justice and all kinds of justice. And one person once observed that if you add an adjective to the word justice, you corrupt it. What about just justice kind of thing? Okay. But so this is more important that we have clarification on things and use this tactical approach for the good of humanity, for the good of our communities, for the good of our people. So yes, I think these are timeless concepts, and they are more pressing now than ever before because of the hostility in the culture.
Donc ouais, donc là on a beaucoup parlé de ton livre et une des questions que je voulais profiter de cet échange pour te demander, pour moi Tactiques c'est vraiment une base pour les apologètes et pour apprendre à faire de l'apologétique, mais est-ce qu'il y a d'autres livres que tu penses seraient utiles pour tout jeune apologète ou quelqu'un qui veut justement se former là-dessus?
Well, Tactics is actually a pretty unique book. There's almost nothing like it on the market. There is one other book that I could recommend by Randy Newman called Questioning Evangelism. Questioning Evangelism. And he employs the questions. All right. Now, in the Tactics book, the game plan that I call Columbo, after the TV character who asks a lot of questions. He was a Lieutenant Columbo, who was a murder detective. That is the questioning motif, and Randy Newman picks up on that in his book, Questioning Evangelism. He actually wrote that book maybe before Tactics. I'm not sure. He wasn't trading on my material. He was coming up with it independently, so that's why it's good, because it moves in some different directions than my book does. But the Tactics book is filled with other tactics, and they all have different names, like Rhodes Scholar and Just the Facts, Ma'am, and Suicide, and these are all Inside Out and whatever. These are all maneuvers that you can use in conversation. And that's one of the things that's very unique about the Tactics book. It isn't just based on a game plan in which you use questions. That's critical. Others have done that as well. But then there's probably, in the new edition, the 10th anniversary edition that came out in 2019, there's probably, 10 or 15 different types of maneuvers in conversation that people can use that would be more effective. So even though Randy has written this book on questioning evangelism, and there might be something else out there, I just read one that just came out last year that's similar and actually trades a lot on the Tactics material. I know the author, and he's a big fan of Tactics, so he kind of transferred a lot of that information with footnotes into his own work. But other than that, the Tactics book is unique, and it's the mother lode, so to speak. So I recommend that. But Randy Newman's book is excellent as well. So that's the only other ones I think of. Now, keep in mind that to do the third step of a Tactics effectively, you're using questions to make a point. Now, if the point that you're making is that the other person's point of view is false and Christianity is true, you need to know why whatever their opposing view is actually false. Okay, you need to know that, or else you can't use questions to show it's false. Now, the Street Smarts book is filled with chapters in which I do that, okay? But the point is, the more that you are educated about, say, the flaws of atheism, the problems of atheism, the more effective you will be at seeing those flaws and then using the tactical approach, questions, to demonstrate what those flaws are. Yep. If you read other books that show the problems of atheism, well, then you can be convinced in your own mind why atheism isn't true, and you will have information to give an atheist to think about. How do you give that information to them? That's the tactical element that makes it most effective to communicate the information. And so any books that will help you with atheism in general or challenges to scripture will help you at least have the background information. So we've talked before about J. Warner Wallace and his book, Cold Case Christianity. If you're talking about a text that defends the reliability of the Gospels, and that's where you're getting pushback, boy, that's the book to read. And I know you've interviewed Jim on that book. And but then you may have to do some translation. You take his information, then you apply the tactical game plan to the information for your conversations. Frank Turek has written a book, and I don't know if this is in French or not. It's with Norm Geisler, and it's called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, one you're familiar with as well, John. So those are books that will give you the information that you need that you can then employ in a tactically sound way based on the technique I teach in both the Tactics book and the Street Smarts book to be most effective. So it's not just one book that's going to help you. It's good to be informed about the details regarding whatever challenges a person is facing, whether it's Islam. And David Wood is really good about that. David and I've been friends for many, many years, but he's very good. He's got a unique personality, but he's very effective in terms of the content. Or there's other people you can go to on other issues if you're being confronted, whether it's atheism or Islam or whatever. You mine the best writers in that material, and then you take what you learn from the Tactics book and develop an interactive, tactically sound, conversational approach based on what you learned.
Et petite dernière question qui me vient à l'esprit, c'est parce que des fois je me mets moi-même en question en me disant est-ce que je devrais le donner à des non-chrétiens? Donc voilà, est-ce que le livre Tactiques est adapté pour des gens qui ne sont pas croyants?
Well, that's an interesting question. There actually is a Tactics book for atheists that was written by Peter Boghossian, the atheist late of Portland State University, and I critique that book in the Tactics book because I think he's using the tactical method as he's teaching atheists to do it regarding Christians, and in a little bit of an abusive fashion. Okay, but nevertheless, that acknowledges the value of using questions, even for the other side. As to the specific question, would I recommend my book for non-Christians? Sure, why not? Okay, for two reasons. One, the tactical approach is something anyone can use in a variety of circumstances. As I mentioned, people who are in sales training or in management training, they are taught a lot of these techniques, ways of maneuvering effectively in conversations with people by using questions, okay? So that they might be able to glean something from that for their own benefit. But if a non-Christian is reading Tactics, what they're going to see is a whole bunch of examples of conversations and that I've had that make a particular point in favor of Christianity. And they're also going to see a bunch of ways that people make false moves when it comes to their own wrong ideas about the world that have spiritual ramifications, and how the Tactics can help them to see that their view is self-refuting, for example, or that's misuse of facts, or it's or something like that. So I'm thinking of different tactical moves that there might be. And so a non-Christian reading Tactics will get a little tutorial in the truth and also in ways people have believed falsehoods and why those are mistakes. And so it might speak to specific things that that they have in mind that they're holding that are not sound ideas. So who knows? You know, even an atheist or a non-Christian reading the Tactics book, some of the points might actually resonate with them, and they'll say, you know what, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
God could use that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, so I will offer it to my friends.
What would be interesting, John, is for you to find a friend that's willing to read it and then ask them about it after they've read it. What do you think?
Yeah.
Now, some atheists are going to say this is manipulative. It's not manipulative. You know that because you've read it. But they're going to say that because that's their way of dismissing it. Oh, this is manipulative. Of course, the issue isn't whether it's manipulative. The issue is whether the points regarding these different belief systems are actually sound. But you know how people will dismiss something by finding something else wrong with it that's irrelevant to the truth claim. Yeah. Oh, you Christians you're hypocrites. Well, maybe we are, but that doesn't address the question of whether Christianity is true or not. That's something about Christians, not about Christianity. But as you know, this is going to happen.
They'll often attack the person, or they'll just, oh, look, Greg Koukl, look, he's not qualified in talking about this subject. It's like, well, okay, throw the whole book in the bin.
Yes, tell me what issue that he addressed that he addressed inaccurately because he wasn't qualified. That would be the right. See, notice I'm asking the question. See, that's the question I'm going to ask them as my rebuttal. Oh, yeah, maybe he's not qualified. Did he get something wrong? What are you qualified to speak against in there that you think he got wrong? And let them see what they say.
Eh bien, écoute, Greg, c'était vraiment une super interview. J'ai pris beaucoup de plaisir. Je veux te remercier pour ton temps, te remercier d'avoir écrit ce livre et qui est maintenant disponible en France, donc dans les éditions Apologia, de l'édition Nouvelles Frontières, NFF. Et voilà, donc merci encore pour cette interview et hâte de lire ton prochain livre.
C'est bon. Merci beaucoup.
Merci.